So Mum, if you want to introduce yourself.
Oh, you can do
Okay,
that.
I'll do that. That's fine. She is the secretary of the association. She's been keeping bees for a long time. If those of you who know the Talabont area know Mum, know that she's been selling honey from the doorstep for over 30 years, and she has a very long customer base for honey from the gate. She's increased her colonies since she's retired, and she's also gone into polystyrene hives as well, which has really enabled her to keep bees independently, although she does ask for support and help from others, but it means that she's able to keep bees independently to the number of colonies she's got for longer as she gets older, which is great. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about what a bee is. So the term that's often used is it's a superorganism, i.e. bees they don't really function on their own. They're not insects that can really function on their own. They're part of a colony, and that colony is the entity in itself. So they're absolutely, they can't survive on their own as insects for very long. They need to be connected with their colony, their sisters, their brothers, and also their mothers. So that's the queen, the drones, and their sisters. So you may see them working independently outside within working forage, but they're absolutely connected back to their colony, their home, their family. And the thing that keeps that entity working in and regulated is the transfer of pheromones. So it's this chemical scent transfer that happens between the bees, and that scent is transferred through all the bees via this communal setting that they live in, this social gathering, and that's their messaging system, and it's how they regulate what the colony needs to do and which parts of the colony need to do certain things. So we talk about this concept of division of labour, and that's very much, there's lots of different tasks that different bees at different stages of their lives take on, both within the hive and outside of the hive, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then as a result, there's this concept of sort of super intelligence. The bee in itself isn't able to act in its own right. It operates as part of this colony, hence the term colony, and it's this community. And there are only a few creatures there are only a few insects that operate like that. If you wanted to compare, I suppose a simple comparison would be that bumblebees operate as single entities, but honeybees are different. They need to operate as a whole. Linda, can you just put your thumb up if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, you can, Helen, but you have a dialogue box on your screen saying move this box away from the shared window.
Oh, right, okay, you guys can see that. I thought that might just be, okay.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so if I take that away, please move this window away from the shared application. Oh, let me see. I'd like to drag it.
Yeah. It keeps
fades in and out for me, Rob.
Sorry?
It's fading in and out for me at the moment.
Yeah, it is for us as well, and it'll just be on the recording. That's the only shame.
That is a shame.
I've no idea what it is. I've never seen it before in my whole life.
This window away from share.
I'm going to.
Shall I try stop share then reshare? Is that okay?
Yeah,
guys?
can do. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, this is a bit disruptive for those who's going to be listening to the recording. So share screen. And then I'm going to go to beginning. My mouse isn't happy because okay, it's not there at the moment, so I don't know whether it'll appear. Sorry guys, are we able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, and you can't see the box at the moment, can you?
No.
Fine. Right, okay. So I just wanted to remind people about what the products of the hive are. So we've got the one that we know most about and think about, which is obviously the honey product. That is the bees' food. It's what they produce for themselves using nectar, and they make it into a high-value sugar product that they can eat themselves. But then also humans are interested in it because of it. It's a sugar-based product that we like as well. So basically, we're stealing their food, and we're encouraging them to produce enough food that we're able to take some of the food without detrimental to that colony. Then the other product that they produce is wax. It's a really valuable commodity, and if you think about it, it was very, very valuable, particularly before petroleum-based products came along for produce, and before we got electricity, because obviously it was connected with making candles. Propolis. This is a product that is made out of tree resin, particularly, for instance, at the moment collecting from the likes of chestnuts or sycamore. And that's used as effectively a glue or a varnish to block up holes in the hive, to protect spaces. It's also used as to mummify any intruders into the hive. So, for instance, I have seen pictures of a mouse that's come in to see to try and steal product from a bee colony being killed, as in it's been stung, and then it's been propolized and mummified by the bees to basically make it benign within that environment. And then royal jelly. Now, those of you who've thought about royal jelly, that is called royal jelly for a reason. It's what the queen is fed in order to turn her from something that would be female, which would be a worker bee, into a laying female. So it's taking her into being reproductively useful for the colony. So that's a superfood, a really intensive, high sugar food that the queen, the eggs that are destined to be queens, are fed. And we're interested in that because it's a high value product for the cosmetic industry as well. And then finally, the pollen grains. So if you think about the bees are eating, they're a bit like most creatures. They need a carbohydrate-based food source, which is the honey and the sugars. But they also need a protein-based product as well, and that's from the pollen grains. So the pollen is the protein. So they're bringing both flowers, they're bringing in nectar, but they're also bringing pollen in as well. And we also can use pollen. You may have seen, particularly in farmers markets in Europe, possibly, you might have seen pollen sold in jars, and it's people may eat it, and they sometimes they'll sprinkle it on their breakfast and have it as an additional alternative to protein. I should have said, if you've got any questions, please type those into the chat space, and we'll try and deal with those at the end if that's possible, guys. So I'll try and just keep going through the presentation, and we'll deal with the questions at the end. Sorry, I should have said that earlier. Okay, so I'm sorry I can't do anything about this at the top. So the importance of beekeeping is this slide. We've got, this tries to give some sort of value to beekeeping to the UK industry, and also in terms of prioritising it for ourselves. So UK consumption of honey leads about £25 million worth per year. Some of these figures may be a little bit old, but it just gives you an idea about how important it is. The UK production of honey is about worth £11 million per annum to the UK. The value to UK agriculture, it's a really important element of the pollination services to the agricultural sector. So, 85% of food across the region are relying on pollinators. Pollinators doesn't just include honeybees, but often they're interlinked. So the honeybee is really important to that. I think it's very important to put a value on its value to the environment, because of course they don't just pollinate agricultural crops, they pollinate a whole range of other crops as well. And the relationships that insects, not just honeybees, but all pollinators have with plants, it's completely symbiotic. There are some plants that have developed themselves specifically for honeybee in terms of the length of honeybee's tongue, and other plants that specifically develop themselves for how bumblebees work as well. So it's really hard to...
Sorry, Helen, your sound is awful. We can barely hear you. You're just really breaking up.
Okay, I'll see if I can move. Is it a bit better if I move closer? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay, I'll just stay close to the microphone then. And then the number of beekeepers. Can you see me? Yeah, well, maybe I can. Okay. So the number of beekeepers, so that's the amateur beekeepers, is circa about 30,000. We have a lot of amateur beekeepers in the UK. In comparison to honeybee farmers, so these are guys who operate commercially and run businesses, that produce honey. There's about 400 of those in the UK. Then number of colonies, it's hard to gauge, but we think it's between 200,000 and 300,000. And then the thought is that we don't have any wild colonies. Now, some people will say, but I've got a colony that lives first in my tree in my garden for years, and that would be a wild colony. The thought is that actual genuine wild honeybees have not existed in the UK for a long time. They're very likely to be bees that have come from a beekeeper's colony and are now considered to be feral colonies. And they may have been there for many years. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of some of the figures behind beekeeping. And we're talking about beekeeping as part of this course about it on amateur level as hobbyists. The bee farming community operates in a very different way. It's much more commercialised, and they're very, very important to the sector in terms of producing honey and also those pollination services. But what we'll be talking about is it within an amateur context. Okay. Are you still able to hear me, guys? Are you okay? Right, so plants pollinated by honeybees.
Helen, the sound isn't great, I'm afraid.
Okay, there's not much I can...
Anthony Rhodes has suggested that everybody turns their cameras off. That might help.
In terms of just giving it a bit more...
bandwidth?
Yes, give that a go, because then we might have a bit more connectivity.
So if anybody could just turn off their cameras, we can turn them back on for questions or whatever. Or... Can I manage them?
You guys still able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you just double check? Rob, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Are you able to hear me now? Is that okay?
Yeah, give it another go then, Helen.
Oh, I know why. It then connects to the...
Sorry, folks, you have to bear with us while Helen does a bit of IT support for herself.
yeah.
It's always the trouble when we give things a go the first time.
Yeah, okay. Is that a bit better? Can you still hear me?
That's a bit better, yeah.
Okay, fine. Thanks, guys. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to talk through the plants that we think about in terms of pollinators that are of interest and useful to us. So we've got oilseed rape, which of course is something that's really important within the UK, but isn't actually that important within our geographical area. There's very little oilseed rape in West Wales, and although it's a big crop for beekeepers elsewhere in the UK, well, quite a lot of the amateur beekeepers are quite pleased that we don't have oilseed rape in this part of the country. It's a particularly challenging crop to work, and as a beekeeper is concerned. So we tend to rely on what we've got here, which is much more around the hedgerows and the woodland environments that we have. As far as crops that are useful to the farmer, or food crops, beans, top fruit, soft fruit, their productivity is significantly increased as a result of a honeybee population, as are salad crops as well. Then sunflowers is also quite an important one in terms of that connectivity between honeybees and sunflowers. And then within the hedgerow environment, within the natural environment, it's the blackthorn and the hawthorn that are particularly are two that are very much associated with the honeybee as well. And we're lucky in West Wales that we live in an environment with a lot of hedgerows, so these two are ones that the bees are working a lot when they're in flower. Okay, so yes, thinking about it, the value in Wales, we obviously live in an environment that's dominated by grass, and grass isn't something that's useful to the honeybee, but we do also live in a very mixed mosaic environment. So as I say, the hedgerows are really important, and we have low chemical usage within the area. And also, if you've got farmers looking to grow white clover as a protein source for their livestock, then also that's a useful thing for the bees. We also are lucky enough to have a lot of scrub areas as part of our mosaic landscape, and again, that's really important for the bees. We have bees based over near between Bow Street and Penryn Coch, and they're working a lot of the village garden habitats as well. So there's, as I say, it's a really mixed landscape. The other thing about bees in this area, of course, though, is that the bees innately are a tropical insect originally, and so we're making them live in West Wales in a relatively cold, wet environment. So if we get a good crop of honey, then we're really, really pleased as beekeepers. And the past few years have actually been not bad for us as beekeepers as far as honey is concerned. The thing I would stress for beekeepers who are starting off on their beekeeping journey, you need to be as interested in how bees work and how they operate, and get as much interest out of the bee behaviour side of things as much as thinking about whether or not you'll get a crop of honey. So that then if you are disappointed with your volumes of honey on the years that we don't get a good crop, you're getting something else out of the beekeeping process yourselves. The other thing to talk a little bit about this, where we're talking about location, is that as an association, we encourage people sourcing bees from local sources if at all possible. This really suits the amateur beekeeper in terms of looking at local adaptation. So there have been people can import bees. You can import bees either from outside of your local area, so within the UK, or even bring them in queen bees, queens from outside the UK if they're licensed to do so. But we'd strongly recommend that you look to purchase or use or acquire colonies if you're starting out in beekeeping that have become adapted to your local conditions, so that you're not using very highly productive queen genetics that isn't matched well with the forage environment that you've got in that area. So please do, and the association can help you look to find locally sourced bees and give you some people who rear colonies that are good for this area, if that would be helpful. Okay, so this gives you a good example of the different types, the comparison in terms of how they physically look between the honeybee at the top there, the bumblebee down there on the right, and the wasp on the left. So the wasp picture is quite nice because it actually puts a wasp and a honeybee right next to each other, so you get a real comparison. We get a lot of calls from people who think they've got problems with honeybees, and actually on closer inspection, either on site or discussing it with them over the phone, it isn't a honeybee situation they've got to deal with. It's actually another insect that they've mistaken as a honeybee. So it's important to understand the difference. And then the other insect that is here, which there's more and more discussion about, because hornets are now starting to be an issue. Not the European hornet, but the Asian hornet is starting to be an issue for bees in the UK. Again, we just wanted to show the distinction between what a hornet is in comparison to a wasp. Okay, if you wanted to know about the hornet side of things, is a whole other conversation, but just to let you know that there is great concern about the Asian hornet coming into the UK. It has now spread across several parts of Europe, and it's now started to creep into the UK as well. And this is something that the honeybee hasn't got any adaptation for dealing with. So it's considered an invasive species, and the government is in the process of trying to minimise its spread across the UK, and asking all association members to try and participate in that as well. Okay, so I just wanted to talk through the differences within a colony. We tend to use the word hive and colony and mix those two up, but technically the colony is the name for the family of the bees. The hive is the wooden box, or the box that we put the bees in. So they are different things, but people tend to mix and match them when they're talking about the family of bees. But in the summertime, in the height of their productivity, you've got one queen, you've got 60,000 workers, and you've got 2,000 drones. So drones are the male bees. Workers are the female bees that are infertile, and the queen is a fertile female as well. So she's the one who's capable of laying eggs. But in the winter time, that colony contracts down because it doesn't need to have as many bees within that space, and there isn't the forage to accommodate that outside of the colony. So you're down to about 10,000 workers, one queen, and no drones. Okay, so again, I just wanted to talk through a little bit about the differences. We've got a picture. The previous picture there gives you an insight of looking at the frames inside a hive, and you can see there the bees working. If you can see my cursor, the little protruding yellow pieces there coming out, that's brood, and that's drone brood. They tend to stick out, and then there'll be flatter a yellow here, which are the cells which have got sealed worker brood in, but you'll get a better picture of those in a bit. This is a picture of a female worker bee. So sorry, all worker bees are female. She's out and about collecting pollen and nectar. She's at the latter stages of her life. She's in the second half of her life. Anything that you see foraging out and about, they're in their last weeks of their lives. They're the mature bees, still working really hard to bring in food source for food for their family. And then here is a drone with really big eyes, just as an example. And then here we've got a picture of the queen, and she's being tended by her workers. Traditionally, people would think that the queen is the one that controls the colony. She's the one who emits the chemical pheromones to provide the regulate the colony and get it so that the colony is able to communicate. But she isn't the one that decides what should be done. Effectively, she is guided by the colony itself, by her worker bees, and she's effectively a slave to her family and spends most of her life in the darkness laying eggs, and she can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. And she only gets out of the colony when she's mated with drones, and she'll fly out in the first 3 weeks of her life to go and mate with drones and try and get as much semen inside her, sperm inside her as possible. And then the other times that she might get out of the colony is if the colony needs to subdivide and then swarming happens, and she will fly away with a selection of her daughters to set up home elsewhere and leave another one of her daughters to turn into a queen and then set up home in the old colony. So she spends most of the time in pitch black, except of course when beekeepers go in to interfere and expose the whole of their environment to daylight, which of course is not their natural environment at all. So beekeepers are constantly disrupting this environment, and it's a real balance to make sure that we get it done in a way that is the least disruptive as possible to the bees, so that they can carry on doing what they want to do. So this is a slide just to help understand a little bit about and show you the symbiosis between the population of the colony and when you end up with the most bees. And it's fairly obvious, but just to be clear, because it's often a question we get asked about, how many bees are there in a colony, how many bees are in a hive. They are completely tuned into when the nectar flow is, and of course that is seasonal. So therefore they are producing bees to work the nectar flow to bring in honey, nectar that they then convert into honey. So you start off, you're in the situation where you've got this 10,000 figure that we used earlier going through the winter and into early spring, and then the queen who's inside that colony over the winter, being maintained by those 10,000 bees, then is stimulated to start laying, and as she lays, the size of the colony, the population goes up and up and up, and then as we end up coming out of the growing season, it then drops back down to that 10,000 to go through into the winter. So it's important to remember that that's how it operates. And then also that colony is able to regulate itself depending on what's happening on almost a week by week basis. So that the bees are able to manage how many eggs the queen lays depending on temperature and nectar availability. And then that means that they can then manage their population depending on what the food sources are available, which is really, really amazing. And that really sets the tone for how they operate across the year. Okay, so I mentioned on one of the first slides there's a real division of labour. So this tends to be associated with age. So when the bee emerges, so remember a bee is laid as a little egg in the bottom of the cell, and then that cell is filled, that egg is surrounded by food, and then it's capped, and then that egg turns into a little larvae, into a maggot larvae, and then that emerges as a bee. So this 0 to 6 days is on emergence, and those bees have jobs in the hive. They're in the colony space doing the housekeeping jobs inside, and certain elements of their body haven't developed. So they haven't developed their wax production glands, and they haven't fully developed their sting. So they're not in a position to do the jobs that they would get given at, say, 15 to 25 or 18 to 35 days. So their jobs are associated with their age, and you can see there that at 20 days onwards, that's when they're out and about. And then they're really there only for maximum up to 10 days. They're in a position where they're doing nectar collection, pollen collection, and water and propolis collection. And then they try and die away from the hive, away from their family environment, so that any disease or that they've got themselves, they're taking them away. So they're innately hygienic in how they operate throughout their life. So that's really important. we'll talk a little bit about what they do in the winter time, because that is slightly different to this, but this is really fundamental in terms of how they operate as insects within their colony environment. So that's just a frame of brood. So brood is they're underneath those capped cells. That's not honey. That's bees growing from eggs to larvae, and then they'll be hatching out of that environment. And those bees that are sitting on there, the bees are actually keeping that brood warm. They're regulating the temperature of that brood to make sure it's at its optimum as regards being kept at the right temperature in order to grow and then emerge and hatch. Okay, and then this slide here gives you a nice image. Right in the center there is the queen bee, and she is being tended by what they call the queen's court. So she's being tended and stimulated by the bees and guided by the bees, and she's got much longer abdomen, so that she's got this, which is full of eggs and sperm, and she's been guided from one cell to the next to lay. And I don't know whether you can just see on the at 11 o'clock from the queen, where my cursor is, there is a tiny white piece of rice at the back there. That is what an egg looks like. And those of you who are going to start to get into beekeeping and haven't done so, learning how to see an egg and see what if there are eggs. If you can't see the queen, are there eggs? That is what you'll be looking for. There's another one just there, I think, as well. You can just see there, so that gives you an idea. And there's, just out of interest, down here on the bottom right, you've got some shiny stuff going on in the cells. That's where nectar's been put in, and that's being evaporated off to be converted into honey, and then that would be capped. Just to give you an idea of what that's looking like. But that's a really nice image of the queen and the queen's court, and you can see how she does look very, very different to worker bees, but it is about getting your eye in for that. Okay. So talking about getting your eye in to understand what's going on within the colony, this slide here is something that many of us as more experienced beekeepers will actually carry with us within our beekeeping tool bag, because understanding that a difference in age of all the bees, and understanding their life cycle is really important to thinking about how you manage the bees as a beekeeper, because what you're trying to do is understand what stage of their life cycle are they at, and whether or not they might be looking to swarm. The reason you're interested in whether they're going to swarm or not is because if you lose your queen, you're losing your production system, because your mated queen will go away, and then if that colony needs to then recreate a queen, it's going to take a minimum depending at what stage she is on that bottom row, it's going to take a minimum of 3 weeks for her to then get out and get mated and then come back in and lay eggs. But that's the minimum period. It'll be likely to be much more if you're still talking a queen cell, a queen egg right at the early stages. So this just gives you the times table for when it takes from a queen to lay the egg at day 1 all the way through to 21 days for the emergence of a worker bee, and 24 days for the emergence of a drone, a male bee, or the 16 days for your queen. So at this time of the year, but we're interested in trying to minimize the amount of swarming that's going on with our colonies so we don't lose our productivity. And if we're seeing sealed queen cells, we know that we're sitting at a stage of between day 8 through to day 14. And our productive queen has very likely gone. It's very unlikely that she'll stay there once that queen cell has been sealed. And we're in a situation where we're now going to have to, that colony will have to start again with a new queen, and there'll be a time lag in terms of their productivity, because the new queen won't be in a position to lay eggs until she's been out and got mated and come back again. That's a very, very quick snapshot of quite a complex issue. Linda will go through that a lot more in a month's time to provide some clarity around that, about how we work our beekeeping management system around that. And no doubt quite a few of you picked up bits and bobs about this already. But just to say, Mum and I, and Mum after 30 years, we still carry this picture around with us as beekeepers, just to remind us of what's actually going on, of what we see within the colony. Okay, so this difference between summer and winter bees is quite important. Summer bees lay up to about 2,000, the queen lays about 2,000 a day. They live for about 3 weeks. They die of exhaustion and they die away from the colony. The difference in the winter bees is the queen will only lay up to about 20 eggs a day. The bees in the winter need to live about 6 months. So those bees in the summer are only working for about 3 weeks and they're dying. But the ones that are born, say September, October time, once the queen has stopped laying, she's gone down to this very low level of laying, those bees need to be able to suddenly be able to do all jobs to look after, although it's a much smaller colony, they're going to have to be able to do all the jobs that would be set across a division of labour of many more bees when it was in the summertime. So these bees become very multifunctional. They end up needing to do everything, and they're keeping the colony going over the winter until they can get that queen to start laying when the temperature starts to rise and the nectar flow starts to become available in early spring, and then they die of disease and old age. And adaptation is absolutely fundamental to what they do. So these summer bees and winter bees are very, very different creatures and operate in very different ways to sustain the colony. I just wanted to give us a little bit of context as far as what our interest as beekeepers are and what our interest over the years have been in the products that come out of a hive. So, of course, at the moment, and probably all of us are interested in the honey product that's coming out of the hive. But as I mentioned earlier, before the lights of petroleum came along, people needed to use candles, and candles were mostly made out of tallow for the layperson, and tallow being animal fat, and they burn really badly, they smoke really badly, and they smell. So in a church environment, which of course was really fundamental to Britain for many years, it's actually the church community who were interested in keeping bees, and they've been associated with beekeeping for many years, but it was for the wax more than the honey. So and it was for these really pure, clean burning candles, which are still used within a church setting now. And the honey was actually a byproduct, and it was, what do they do with the honey? And ironically, then you'd have the monks making the meads. So it's just interesting that we're interested now in the honey, because of course we have other sources for candles and we have electricity. But at that time, it was the wax for candles that was really important to that community. So Mum is just going to talk a little bit about skeps and the different hive systems that we've got. We've only got a couple more slides to go through, and I know it has been a whistle-stop tour, but we'll just spend a little bit more time going through these bits and bobs before we take questions.
Well, we thought that you might be interested in how people kept bees in the past. And before we knew about the bee space, which really revolutionized the way beekeepers kept their bees, this picture that shows bee balls and skep, how they kept the bees, is how they used to do this. And they had a different idea altogether about the bees. They actually had to kill the bees to collect the honey. So they wanted their bees to swarm frequently so that they had lots of skeps and lots of beehives. And they used to let them just swarm, and then they'd pick them up. And at the end of the season, in the early autumn, they would go along the hives, hefting or lifting the hives to see how heavy they were. And the heaviest ones they would use to produce honey. The lighter ones they would also take the honey from, because they knew that they wouldn't last the winter. So the medium-sized ones were the ones that they thought that would be able to go through the winter and be ready for them in the next spring. So the bees were actually held over a sulfur pit, and they were killed, and then they were able to take the honey away, because they didn't know about being able to remove the honey without killing the bees. But then this, I think he was German, or was he
European? Let's say he's European.
European, right? That's safe enough. Called Langstroth, and he realised that the bees always made a bee space between each frame or comb, so that the two bees could go back to back against each space, and they wouldn't fill that space. Make it bigger, and they would fill it up with brace comb, and you'd never be able to get the honey out very easy. But if you put frames in with foundation in, or even just a little bit of wax on the top of the frame, the bees would draw it down, and you'd have this bee space so that you could lift out each individual frame, and if there was honey on it, you could take it out. So that's when we started using boxes like the you see the picture now. The ones on the right hand side are the national hive, and that's what is mainly used in Britain. There are many other hives all over the world, different types that they use and are adapted to their bees. The ones on the left are national hives, but the whitish one is called Dartington hive. Used for you can have 2 colonies together, and if people are disabled, they find that those are easier to use, because you can get right close up to them in a wheelchair.
Okay, and so just if I can explain a little bit about the frames here. So this here, the green one at the bottom is effectively a national system, and this box down below, understanding the concept of bee space was fundamental to setting up the shape of the boxes we now put bees in. Bees don't really want to live in a box. They don't want or not want to live in a box like this. The box system is for the convenience of the beekeeper. And where this beekeeper is standing in the upper picture, effectively you've got the bees living, their family environment is in the lower box. Then there's a little bit of mesh that has holes in that are small enough to let the workers go up and down. Big enough to let the workers go up and down, but small enough to stop the queen from being able to travel up and down. So the queen is now confined in this lower box called a brood box, and then in order to stockpile their honey, the worker bees are then placing the honey in the upper boxes, which are called supers, and therefore it means that the beekeeper is then able to take the honey away without dismantling the family environment, so that allowing the family environment to stay intact, but still be able to take the honey away, and then make a judgment call about how much honey should be left with that colony. And the reason we're able to do that is because Langstroth discovered this concept called bee space, and that's absolute game changer. And that only happened in the late 1800s. So we're still, in terms of you think about the lifetime that the honeybees have been worked and honeybees have been around, it's still a fairly recent invention, but it's now what we use within the developed world as regards looking at being beekeepers and looking after bees and looking at honey, collecting honey. It's completely fundamental to how we're able to collect honey. Okay, this slide here is just a little bit about the equipment. Rob will talk more about equipment on one of his talks, but the 3 things that we really felt are really important if you were starting out in beekeeping, Mum will just explain those.
Yeah, you can see the first one is a smoker, absolutely essential to every beekeeper. It calms the bees down so that you're not damaging the bees, they're not stinging you, and it makes your management of looking through the hive a lot easier. The second thing is your hive tools. Now there's a picture there of 3 types of hive tools, all with different ends on them. The majority of, I would say yes, the majority of beekeepers like this hook on the end. It's a J, they call it a J hive, a J hive tool, and that makes it easier for you to hook underneath the end frames of the lugs of the frames of the when you're going into the colony, and you're able to lift them out without damaging the bees too much. Then the other yes, you'll see on the bottom right there's talk about spacers. Now there's many types of spacers, and that is actually to keep the frames spaced so that the bee space is correct. Some of the frames, you can buy frames that actually have a bit of an extension on them, and they're already integral to the frame, but those are separate ones that you can add onto the end of the frames to give the right space. And then there was one other thing, Helen. Ah, yes, definitely gloves. As a beekeeper, you will, I'm quite sure, in your beekeeping career, you will end up with goodness knows how many different kinds of gloves before you come to the type that you actually do find that is best for you, that you can lift the frames up easily, you can touch the bees and feel them without getting stung. So we'll talk about those in great detail a lot later on.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of the talk now, so thank you very much for your patience, guys. Just to say that I know that we've got a mix of people on the call. A lot of you are from the Aberystwyth area and are interested in becoming a member or already a member of our association. There is another association within our locality, Cymdeithas Gwenanwyr Ceredigion as well, which run meetings and support beekeepers through the medium of Welsh, and they're effectively our sister organisation within the area. But then also, if you're from outside this area, maybe some of you are from Powys, I'd strongly recommend that you find your own local association as well. You're very welcome to become members of our association, either as associates, which costs about £8 a year, or as a full member with a hive yourselves, but also looking out for your own association if you're a bit further afield as well. And all associations in Wales are affiliated to the Welsh Beekeeping Association, which is the umbrella organisation that supports beekeeping in Wales and works alongside the British Beekeeping Association, which covers England, and to try and help beekeepers keep bees, amateur beekeepers keep bees as well as they possibly can. Okay, the only other little thing that we wanted to cover before we move into questions is we're mindful that some of you might be asking and wanting to know a little bit about what the bees might be working right now, as this is a good time of year for the bees to be foraging. So Mum was just going to talk a little bit about what bees are working at the moment.
Yeah, if you take, as a beekeeper, you notice all the time what is in flower in your area, and encourage not only yourselves to plant plants and flowers, but also your neighbours as well, because remember the bees will go up to fly up to 3 miles to forage and get nectar. But at the minute, anyone who's got cotoneaster in the garden can hear the buzz of the bees, because they go crazy on cotoneaster. It's a tiny little wall-hugging plant, and with little tiny button red flowers, and you hardly think that you'd get very much from it, but it's really valuable for them. And at the minute, that is in full flower. Also, don't be too afraid of dandelions in your garden, because bees love dandelions. The Welsh poppy, also let it grow wherever you can. At the minute, gorse and broom is in full flower, and gorse especially is very good for them. There's lots of it around here. Regarding trees, you've got horse chestnut, you've got all your apple trees and your fruit trees in flower at the minute. Hopefully they haven't got the bit of frost that we had last night. And you're basically looking for, bees look for flowers that are open flowers. If you have lots of roses in your garden, they have a nice perfume, but they are difficult to get any nectar from. But any of the open roses, the dog roses, the climbing roses, they are perfect for them, because the bees can actually get to the center of the flower and collect pollen and nectar.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, guys. So yeah, do give us some questions if you want. Were you mostly able to hear what I was saying there, chaps? Did it come through okay in the end?
Yeah, that was fine, Helen. So Helen, I'm just going to manage the system slightly now by we've had a couple of questions come through on chat. So before I unmute everyone for a bit of a free-for-all, we'll just deal with the questions on chat first.
Okay.
So we've had a question about supering. So when you answer these questions, Helen, can I suggest that you perhaps explain what the question even means, because there'll be some people in the audience that won't even know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so no problem at all.
Question is, if I add a new super, do I move the existing nearly full one to the top of the hive?
Okay, so this is a question about these boxes above the queen excluder, above the family environment, and these supers are the ones that are full of honey, hopefully. And this is an example where there is a super full of honey, and this beekeeper wants to give the bees some more space to continue to fill the new space with honey. I would say this, you don't have to. It's not a rule that you need to put it the empty super nearest the brood space. But Mum and I often would. So you'd be in a situation, so you'd lift that heavier super, take it to one side, put that empty super with these empty frames that you're hoping the bees will continue to fill with honey nearest to the brood box, nearest to the brood space, and then put the heavier super above that, and then put the roof back on. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree, but also just depends on the time of the year in the season. If you're in a nice nectar flow, in the middle of the summer, and there's plenty of nectar going, then it's even better to put it below the full super, because then the bees haven't got to crawl so far up to fill it up, and they'll fill it up much faster if it's right close to the brood box.
The presumption here is that you've got a strong colony, so that they're in a position where they are working hard, they're able to go and get their food. If you're suddenly worried about the fact that you've got a very weak colony that need access to their food, taking that food that they've already made away from the colony can be problematic. But if you've got a strong working normalized colony that needs some more space to put food, and you're in a situation where you don't think it's going to swarm, then you put that empty space, that empty super space, next on top of the queen excluder, next to the brood box, and then put that heavier super above that empty super.
Okay, thanks, Helen. So the next question, there's a little bit of confusion in the question, so you're going to have to explain a couple of things here. So the question is, can you stop a queen leaving if you take the egg away, and can you identify it easily?
Okay, so I think that the person that's asked the question thinks that the egg is different from any other egg that the queen has laid. But in actual fact, the egg that the queen lays only becomes a queen in the way because it's been fed differently and it's been held in a different kind of cell. So all the eggs look the same. It's only the cells that are different.
Yeah, so a worker egg and a queen egg are exactly the same thing when they're laid. It's about the fact that that worker egg is put into a queen cell, and a queen cell is a big space that drops down, and it's this long elongated environment, and it's that specifically that shape. So the queen is forced to lay the egg in that environment into that longer cell, and then that leaves space for them to stuff it full of really heavy duty bee food and royal jelly, so that female, that egg that can then turn into a queen, and it has the space and the environment to do so. So the taking the egg away doesn't stop a queen being developed, because if you did take the egg away, they just put another egg inside and it would look exactly the same as all the other eggs. It's just the environment that egg is being grown in is what turns her into a queen.
So Louise, you've asked a really interesting question there, and the answer is more than we can really deal with in a 2-minute question and answer session. So
Linda's session in a month's time will help massively with this, because she'll have some really good pictures of what a queen cell looks like, and we'll talk through about the management of those queen environments to help you understand more about how the colony works.
Great. So the next question is, do bees like wisteria, or is it bumblebees that are seen on it?
And I do believe that bees do like wisteria. And the reason I say that is because I know they go onto laburnum, which is very similar shape to wisteria. So the answer is yes.
Yeah, and if anyone saw Gardener's World last Friday, you'd have seen a really nice example of honeybees on wisteria. Okay, so the next question, Helen, I'm going to let you have this one.
Thanks, Linda. Linda is one of our most expert beekeepers with the association. I feel like I'm being tested, guys.
Good game. So, Helen, does the association endorse using chemicals when the bees are sick? The person asking the question can't remember the name of the disease that they've heard mentioned, but apparently there's quite a toxic chemical that's used to treat this disease, and someone has also told them that you can deal with this disease without chemicals.
Okay, so I
think they really mean about Varroa as a disease, because I can't think that they're thinking of the normal diarrhea disease that we used to use antibiotics for, but you can't get them now, when it was found that they really didn't work anyway. So if it's antibiotics, you can't get them, and you certainly wouldn't be wanting to treat the bees with it anyway.
So Mum's making a distinction there between disease and parasites. So the Varroa is a parasitic mite that lives within the colony, and many colonies now have Varroa at varying levels within those colonies. And that parasitic mite, it's a really fascinating mite in its own right, in the way that it has developed its life cycle to fit exactly with elements of the honeybee production cycle. But it also brings with it itself, bites the bees, and that in itself can bring the condition of the bees down. But more fundamentally, it can pass on diseases into the bees themselves, particularly wing virus. Sorry, it's not diseases, so it's viruses. They can transfer wing viruses, which also will bring the condition of the bees down. And they can be managed in a range of ways, and chemical treatment is one of those ways. Beekeepers are strongly encouraged to use integrated pest management systems, which means a mix of chemical and non-chemical based systems, and also a process of monitoring what the varroa mite population within their colony is before they decide to treat with chemicals. As an association, we don't tell beekeepers what to do. That's absolutely, they wouldn't take very kindly to that. But we do offer chemicals and we can buy at a discounted rate as an association. So if people wish to use chemicals, we will provide them and they can use them themselves, and then those beekeepers will decide how they want to use them. And within the association, we have people who use no chemicals at all, people who use and are purely using non-chemical based treatment methods. We have people who use chemicals and only use them when they feel they need to, and others who maybe use them more routinely. There's a real mix within the beekeeping community. Linva has recently written a book on integrated pest management, and she's waving it at us now. Excellent. And it's a really good book. And Linva, do you want to tell us how people can access it?
So I just realised that in the picture it's back to front. So that's perhaps, can you see, is that back to front with you?
No, it looks okay, our way.
Oh, good. It's just back to front on my picture. So I've just co-written this booklet, which is available through the British Beekeepers Association. And it's all about how you can control varroa through a variety of techniques. So not just using chemicals, but biotechnical methods as well. So physical things that we can do within the colony to control varroa at different times of the year. So that reduces our reliance on these chemicals. So this book, I think it's on sale for £10 or £12, and it's available through the British Beekeepers Association online shop. I don't get royalties, so right.
Thanks, Linda. And it's also a very visual book, which is great in terms of getting some visuals, which of course is something that is hard for us to share with people outside of this environment. So, okay, next question, Linda.
So the next question, how do you make the decision when to harvest or when to instead leave the frames in place? Is this based on judgment and experience relevant to your colony and location, or is it based on a set of hard rules?
The former.
Yeah.
The former, certainly the former. And also your decision about whether or not you want to take, how much honey you want to take. Some people have had a really good spring, for instance, already. And I know that on our colonies, there are some supers which we could take off if we wanted, but we need to make a decision. That would be unusual for us in West Wales to take honey off so early. But there are several people, probably on this call actually, who are considering whether or not they might take honey off already. If you did that, that would be fine, but you have to supplement. So you'd have to exchange with something else. Those bees are in a position where they're still productive. They still need the food for them to actually work. They've got lots and lots of bees that they need feeding. And if you take food away at this time of the year, and any time of the year, you'd need to trade it off. Unlike maybe if you're beekeeping in a more tropical environment where there isn't a season, you can beekeep all the way through the year. There's always something for them to work. For us in this country, we have a seasonal flow of honey. So if we want to take honey off this time of year, we'd need to supplementary feed. If we took honey off, we'd stick towards the end of the season, and the end of the season would mean sort of August time. We would then look to supplementary feed to make sure those bees have got supplementary feed to keep them going over the winter, because effectively we've taken their food. And when we talk about supplementary feed, we're talking about giving them a sugar product, and that would be a sugar syrup for them to then convert that into honey, which incidentally is, you're not allowed to sell that because that isn't actually honey. That counts as far as something that you could sell in a jar, but it's an adequate product for them because they'll convert that glucose into fructose, that sucrose into fructose for themselves. And yes, the same would apply if you took honey off now.
And remember, every year you may not be getting honey from them, and so you may not get any honey because it's been a bad season, but you would still have to feed them to make sure that they have enough stores to get through the winter, so that they'll still be alive in the spring, ready for the next year. hopefully a honey crop.
And also, before you take any honey off, you need to make sure it's ripe. And the easiest way to tell if your honey is ripe and ready for extraction is whether the bees have capped it or not. So after they filled the cells, they cover it with a wax covering to keep it secure and fresh, basically. It's just like putting a lid on a jar. So if they've done that, then you know the honey is ready to take and extract. Okay, one more question here. Do bees like rhododendrons?
They're not that keen on them. It doesn't do them any harm, apparently, to take nectar or pollen from them, but it's usually bumblebees that go for rhododendrons. What do you think, Linda?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is some evidence that some rhododendron species are actually slightly toxic to honeybees.
I've heard that, but I think there's only very few, and I don't think any of them are here in Britain.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one. So, yeah, but generally they don't like it.
My bees were all over our rhododendrons today collecting pollen.
It sounded like Phil. Phil, you'll have to speak up.
Yeah, it's me. Just saying that my rhododendron bush was covered with honeybees today. They're loving the pollen.
Oh, do you know what type of rhododendron? Was that the ponticum, the purple one, or is it a special one?
It's a white flower.
Yeah, it's not the pinky purple ponticum that's widespread.
No.
Question here about badgers. So this person has said that they know badgers will dig up bumblebee nests, but could they also raid your hives?
Absolutely, yes. If you have badger sets on your property, you have got a bit of a problem, because badgers are real bullies. In case when they decide to go where they want to go, they will go. We know someone that had to give up beekeeping because badgers were constantly getting through the fence, pushing the beehives over and eating all the bees, the honey and the brood. So can be a problem. I think they even put them on walls to try to stop some badgers from coming, and they still came. So yeah, generally, I mean, we've got badgers around here. They don't bother us, but they can be a pest if they like the honey.
Next question then. So this person has 9 acres of gold, interesting, and bee-friendly award-winning gardens near Machynlleth, and they've also bought a property in Eglwysfarch, which they're working on. They would like to put bees in the garden in the future, and they're asking, is it worth having someone with hives to bring some bees there to teach them within their gardens, or should they take the plunge themselves and get their own bees?
That's a hard one. Depends how deep your pocket is, I would say.
It might be useful for them to direct message Mum and send an email, and then it could be something that we could share within the association and see if anybody's interested in maybe using that as a site to start with, and then take it from there, I would suggest. And I think we strongly recommend that people get used to working in colonies before they buy their own, and also do some sort of beginner's course as well, and get some contact with bees before you spend a lot of money, and then potentially have what could be a negative or disheartening experience. So it may well be a case that it's useful to start off with somebody else's hives in that garden, and then see whether or not we can take it forward. But I'd recommend contacting Mum by email, and then she can share that around the association, and we can see if we can help out with that.
Is that okay, Anthony? Hopefully that answers your question. And if you have any trouble getting hold of Anne's email address, then some magic will happen and we'll work out how to help you somehow.
Yeah, I'll type it out here so that people can see it on chat, yeah?
Okay, lovely.
Yeah, that would be very useful, thank you.
Great. So the next question. So a single bee in the hive has been seen with a distorted wing. Is this the start of worse things to come?
Is it the start of what?
Worse things to come.
Well, certainly if you've got deformed wing virus, which is what I would think you have probably got, which has been transferred by the varroa mite, it means that you've got certainly a percentage of varroa that would need to be treated for the hive to to survive and to produce honey for you and to thrive and for it to thrive. So yes is the answer. You would need to monitor it to see what your varroa drop is and decide what treatment you want to give.
And that may or may not be a chemical-based treatment based on your priorities, Roy. So, but yes, it's definitely worth investigating further.
Thank you.
Okay, Helen, that concludes our question. Oh no! Oh, Phil has.
He's doing a bit of promo of the Facebook page.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you. Yeah. So, there's another question. What's the best time of the year to get a colony? Not in the winter. They're quite hard to find in the winter, I would suggest as well. Yeah. So there are association members who are selling colonies at the moment and getting them prepared and ready for sale within the next month or two. That tends to be the time that people will be buying colonies, is in depending on the weather, May, June time would be the best time to get a colony.
And obviously the earlier you're able to get it, the faster the colony is able to grow, and the greater the chance of you getting a small crop of honey in your first year. I would also say that if you don't get honey in your first year, that's not an unusual situation. You perhaps shouldn't expect too much, because your colonies will be settling in and growing well, and you certainly don't want to end up with a colony dying over the winter because you're really taking off the honey.
And if you're interested in acquiring bees this year or whenever, then please again do get in touch with Mum, and she'll be able to provide you with contact details of people who are selling bees locally. And most of them are members of the association and the people that we would all buy from ourselves as well. So yes, do get in touch with Mum, and I've popped the email address on chat for you if you need that. Okay, I think we've done. Look, it's an hour and 10 minutes. How did that happen?
Right.
We probably stuck to about 40-50 minutes for the talk itself, and I'm sorry about the IT glitches, guys. I hope you're able to hold on with us with that. I hope that was okay. Our next talk will be going into much more detail of elements of what we've spoken about today, because today was absolutely a whistle-stop tour of a whole range of things, which we would normally spend 2 to 3 hours for this as a face-to-face talk with people. So Linva will be covering in a month's time the colony and the queen. And it could be via Zoom at the same time, 7 o'clock. You'll need to register for it via the Cletwr site as well, so that we get an idea of numbers, if that's okay. So just because you registered this evening doesn't mean that you need to re-register again, I think, for the next one. So thank you so much for coming along and participating and helping out and having such good questions as well. And thanks to Rob and Linda for helping on the admin as well.
Good, well done, Helen. Thank you very much.
Cheers, thank you everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.